Hello and welcome to Path to Power. I'm Matt Cooper.
And I'm Ivan Yates.
And so we're getting closer to government formation. The Dáil does reassemble next Wednesday, and it looks unlikely that they will be in a position to elect a Taoiseach on that day, although you sort of wonder why. I mean, Ivan, why don't they just get on with it? I mean, we know it's Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael coming back together. It is a question of doing a deal, I know, with the independents, because they're not going to do a deal with Labour or the Social Democrats, it would appear, and I don't think they were ever that serious about it. So given that they're coming back to power, why not just get it over and done with and get the Taoiseach elected next Wednesday?
Well, first of all, my understanding is on Monday, in principle, a deal was agreed between Harris and Micheál, and having been through a very difficult relationship whereby last April this upstart was brought into the room as his boss, and then a tempestuous first 10 days of the campaign where Fianna Fáil were flummoxed by why Fine Gael were attacking them when they were seeking to coalesce again. We covered all that, but my understanding is the two party leaders agreed in principle the top line issues of A, that the next general election will be in November 2029. And that fixed term of 5 years gives a lot of clarity in relation to rotation, whether it's 3 years and 2. So
that's for the position of Taoiseach.
Exactly.
And for the key ministries as well, like finance and public expenditure.
Absolutely. And so the situation is there are 15 members of cabinet. Take out the Taoiseach, will it be 7 and 7, or pro rata would be 8 and 6?
And sorry, you're not taking any role there for an independent.
Well, this is why Wednesday is so crucial. Because that brings in the position of the Count Corla.
And you had the scoop last week, in fairness. Everyone else followed up on you.
Well, put it like this.
Verona Murphy was the person that the
so getting her over the line is a little bit more difficult.
And particularly because it's a secret ballot.
Well, so my understanding is that it's like a by-election. It's a single transferable vote. So you could vote 1 John McGuinness and 2 Verona. You could vote 1 Angus O'Snoddy and 2 Verona. So if she gets enough first preferences, it doesn't matter that there be some loose ends, because 7 TDs have nominated Sean O'Friel and 7 have nominated McGuinness and Sinn Féin. So a lot of, with their whole block of 39 will be someone. So therefore, if she was elected, just say, and there is an if about that, because there's some consumer resistance in Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael to that, I think it facilitates Michael Lowry's strategy, which is that they will get a super junior and 2 other juniors. And the sort of lie of the land that they're looking at there, Lowry isn't looking for anything for himself.
I was just about to ask that. Does he see himself as a way back into cabinet, having been thrown out in indignity back in 1996, that this could be the great political resurrection for himself? Or he prefers to be the Wizard of Oz in the background, the puppet master?
Well, you see, the point is this. I find in politics, the handiest people to deal with are the people who send you an invoice. The people who do you big favours and expect to be repaid in big favours and don't seek an invoice like Lowry looking for a ministry are the people who actually wield the most power. And I'm sure he is looking to situations, whether it's in Tipperary or whether it's in sectors of the economy, that he will have open access. And the less ministries, the more power he will have.
I'm highly amused that you use the phrase invoice for Michael Lowry, given all the difficulties had previously with invoices with Ben Dunn and with others, but there you go.
Well, no, I'm just using it as a phrase because a lot of people have done a lot of work for the two parties, and as someone said to me who's an apparatchik in it, we're waiting for invoices to come in terms of exactly what we owe them.
So
the key principle, never repay a big favour with a small favour.
But I just wonder, how does Micheál Martin view dealing with Michael Lowry, given, as I said last week, at one stage he demanded his resignation from the Dáil on the back of the Moriarty Tribunal report because that he had corruptly influenced the awarding of the mobile phone licence back in the 1990s. He demanded his resignation, which clearly he didn't get, and Lowry has been re-elected by the people of Tipperary 3 times since that. How does he get on with it? And how does he get on with Simon Harris? I mean, or is it Simon Harris is taking the advice of Phil Hogan and saying you can deal with Lowry, blah, blah?
Well, put it like this. I would say that, Lowry is a great survivor of wielding influence, and the situation is that it's usually just journalists get caught up on the baggage and legacy of history and inconvenient truths.
Such as tribunal findings in relation to the corrupt process.
You see, when you're unencumbered by history and knowledge of this kind, you just deal with the present and you focus on the future. So what I want to say is this, that if Verona is elected Count Corla, I think that's the difference between the regional independents looking for a cabinet minister or a super junior. But in any event, the most senior person in office will be Sean Canny. Whether it's super junior or whatever, it depends. And no one can predict in a secret vote what the outcome will be. But that's the plan, as I understand it. And I think there is a level of support, whether it's in number twos or whatever, for Verona, on the basis that A, it suits Fine Gael and Wexford to have a chance of winning a seat back. They've had no seats since 1927. And secondly, there is the point that she's seen as, whether you like her or not, as quite able and will be firm to deal with people, and secondly that she is a woman, and that the gender equality issue of never having a lady, a female, a woman as Count Corla is a worthy step in its own right. But it also means that what Micheál can say to his backbenchers, this means that Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil get an extra cabinet position. And I thought you were all jockeying for position. So that's the card he has to play there. But so therefore, what happens on Wednesday is quite important in terms of the dynamics. But I think in all circumstances, should that go west, the prospect of there being an FFG government when the Dáil reconvenes on the 18th of March is almost certain. But the jockeying for position is very interesting. But there's, you spoke about the Labour Party, very interesting fallout for someone like Alan Kelly. And lots of other interesting players.
Yeah, because there are a few things I think we should just address here. Before we get to Labour, I was talking to a senior Fine Gael person last weekend who was saying that their interest in involving the Social Democrats was quite real. And there was a long-term thinking in it. And let me go through this and see what you think of it. In the sense of, I think there was a realisation, with the Social Democrats, if they get involved, are going to be fearful of being run over like the Greens. So they would be perhaps more aggressive in their positioning and the rest of it. But the thinking was that, and this goes to the idea of the next election in November 2029, and politicians do look to the next election, even not, and saying, do they want to be in a position whereby Fine Gael at that stage would be nearly 19 years in government, and that at that stage the left would have sort of coalesced in a bloc offering itself, even if in lots of different constituent parts, as an alternative government. So the idea was get the Social Democrats into government with them now, and you break up the strength of the left, the big bloc on the left going into the next election. And I was thinking about that, and then sort of struck me that, well, the left are well able to break themselves up and not agree without having to have it done for them. But I'm not sure that even in 5 years' time, would the Social Democrats and Labour and the Greens and Sinn Féin and People Before Profit all be able to agree on a common platform to go against Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael? And in any case, how much can you actually plan for 5 years out in relation to all of that? Anyway, the thinking was, I was told, Social Democrats, but I suspect the Eoin Hayes affair blew all that up because the Social Democrats got so weakened during the week by all of that controversy.
Yeah, and there's quite a lot in the Eoin Hayes
which we get to in a minute.
Okay, but put it like this. I think generally speaking, the view in Fianna Fáil, certainly as far as I understand it, is that the Soc Dems are a bit flaky, have no experience of the hardship and the kind of pressures in government, and would not be reliable partners. Secondly, I think there's a feeling they lack a little bit of coherence, and that the Labour Party would be much more reliable. But all of that would involve the concession of cabinet posts, which isn't up for grabs, and all of it is weakening the axis of power, which is FFFG. So I actually think all that's irrelevant.
Yeah, and Labour, of course, in the situation, I think there does seem to be a bit of internal division in that. I think probably the likes of Ivana Bacik and Alan Kelly would quite fancy government positions, ministerial positions. But that would split the Labour Party, wouldn't it? That there are probably other members of the Labour Party who said this is not the way to rebuild by going into power.
Well, just on Alan Kelly, no, I haven't been speaking to Alan himself, but two sources said to me, don't rule out Alan Kelly has come to the conclusion that there's no future for him in the Labour Party and that he could either join Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil. I think he has a good relationship with Simon Harris. That might soften the cough of Michael Lowry a little bit. But the point about it is that if he wants to be a minister, he doesn't see an immediate route. Now, he may not be standing in a subsequent chair election, but I think he could follow the other Michael O'Leary, the former leader of the Labour Party.
From the 1980s.
Yes, and so not the aviation guy, the politician, former leader of the Labour Party, who left a sort of difficult coalition breakup between Labour and Fine Gael and went and joined Fine Gael and was re-elected.
But he never got rewarded with a ministerial position subsequently,
did
he?
He was the director of elections in a divorce referendum, but the point is this: I've been surprised at the people who said to me, "Just watch Alan Kelly. Don't be surprised if he makes a move if things evolve the way they think." The other thing that is very interesting is that there's quite a number of reflections now that people have sort of lost their exhaustion phase, and one of the reflections of it is that having the rotation of the second term of Taoiseach is very disadvantageous from this point of view. That for the last 18 months, 2 years, however long it is, Micheál Martin was able to have a level of detachment that he was part of the government, he was co-leader of the government, but yet he wasn't in the top job. Therefore, the scrutiny on Harris in the election was greater, the opprobrium for anything that people felt unhappy about was greater, and that one of the lessons that Fine Gael are feeling that actually going second is actually a liability.
But they'll be going second again.
They will.
Because there is no way that Micheál Martin, particularly at his age, is going to say, well, I'll let you have the next couple of years and then I'll come in. He wants to get back into the
But do you understand the point?
Now.
So just say, in 3 years' time, if Jack took over from Micheál as Taoiseach and not as party leader, all the haranguing would be on the Taoiseach of the day, all the, kind of international...
And he'd have a little bit of time to get used to being the leader of Fianna Fáil to bring them into the next election.
So, I think that's quite smart. And I think all the time there is a feeling that if FF or FG get the upper hand, the weaker parties over the period next 5 years, say in the polls or whatever, and that emerges, there is a real threat of vulnerability to that party, which I think opens up not the vista of a united left. I put it like this. I think Sinn Féin are going to come to the conclusion in a couple of years' time their best route to power is with Fianna Fáil. And I honestly think that is going to be their strategy, and they will want to pick up votes. But put it like this.
What do you think of the way Sinn Féin are going at the moment? I mean, they are bombarding us with press releases on every issue. I'm quite taken aback by... you think that they would actually just say, okay, look, the election has been lost. We're not getting into power. And I know they're trying to spin that, they've got the mandate and the biggest party in opposition and all the rest of it. And they're bringing up this thing, how dare Fianna Fáil not talk to us and all the rest of it. But the reality is, look, go back, lick your wounds and get ready. And yet they're just, every spokesperson is out complaining with this, that and the other thing. And I'd say the vast majority of the public are taking no notice of any of that stuff. And
I wasn't even aware of that.
Well, I get all the material, I get all the party emails and the rest of it into work and the rest of it. But I've just been noticing that it is, Sinn Féin have been utterly active in relation to this. And I just sort of wonder why.
Well, put it like this. I don't see... I mean, obviously, they've got to keep the morale up. They've got to keep their supporters, wasn't a waste of time voting for them if they're not going to be in government. A couple of other reflections on the election. One of the things I think that's been credited within Fianna Fáil of being their success has been their social media campaign. And someone that's familiar to you and I... Siobhan Russell, who was our producer on The Tonight Show, became the Fianna Fáil press officer. She and Craig, somebody, I forget his second name, have spent the last 4 years, she started in early 2020, working on data analysts working on how we can get content about, say, a post-primary school in Palmerstown to the people of Palmerstown. And if you look at the spend, which is nearly 400 grand of all the parties on social media, primarily Instagram and Facebook, I think there is evidence to show that they did the smartest campaign. Her production quality of videos and so on. There was a particular one with Micheál Martin's son, Micheál A, as they call him, and other
this is
things.
The Cork Gaelic footballer, the goalkeeper.
Yes, like yourself, a famous goalkeeper for Cork.
He's a better goalkeeper, and I never played for Cork.
So the point is, I thought you did Junior B or something. No? So the point about it is this: that she is being credited now. I think Paul Clarkson will be appointed the government press secretary, but I'd watch that space in terms of the acknowledgement within the party that if you look at the impressions relative to the spend and relative to 2020, that Sinn Féin went down in terms of their effectiveness for their digital campaign, and Fianna Fáil had the most impressions.
But isn't that interesting, given that everyone was going on about the TikTok Taoiseach?
Yeah.
And he was the guy who was supposed to be owning social media. And then I suppose it all went wrong in Kanturk when suddenly there was a bit of social media that went against him. And actually, just before we do take a break, how is Simon Harris, do you think, now at this stage, realising that he's not going to be Taoiseach again for another few years, given that he just enjoyed the job clearly so much and that he campaigned very much on the basis of returning to that job? And this is the thing I think a lot of people are wondering is, how is he going to be as Taoiseach, as in that, I suppose he'll have a number of jobs. He will be required to do a lot of work internally within Fine Gael, to bedding in the new TDs, but also putting structures in place to try and win additional seats at the next election along both ways. But how is he going to cope with the fact that he'll have to be perhaps more measured in talking about everything?
Well, I think he's a very happy bunny. He's absolutely elated that in a situation where he took on the party and maybe was heading for opposition and 20 seats, he's now back in government. He will be Taoiseach again in the fullness of time. The interesting thing is, what portfolio will he take?
Foreign affairs as well.
Yeah, I heard he's hankering after justice. Justice has become amazing.
But he did have
Jim
6
O'Callaghan,
months there, didn't
that's
he?
right.
During the
Apparently
time
he liked it. He liked it.
Well, yeah, and when Helen McEntee was out on her maternity leave, he wasn't exactly a quiet caretaker, you know, in the way that, you know, on the previous maternity leave, was it Heather Humphreys who covered for her, and you would have really have noticed. But Simon Harris did show a sort of a hankering. Now, will that become an issue, though? Because
there's 3 issues.
Well, sorry, Jim O'Callaghan as well. Really
and James Brown. James Brown has been the junior minister there, drafted the manifesto, and is part of the negotiating team, which Jim O'Callaghan isn't, and is very much seen as in line for preferment in that department. But Fianna Fáil proposed the dismantling of that department into a Department of Justice, which deals with policing, prisons and courts, and a Department of Domestic Affairs that will take in the migration issue, all the administration of the migration bureaus and all that good stuff,
God,
and
wants to take that
border
on?
Security. So the way it is this, that you have there's some speculation that Darragh O'Brien is going to move out of housing and will either go to health or justice. So he's part of the negotiating team as well. And my personal view is I think he may be going into health. But the interesting thing about it is that I was surprised, because I thought it was automatic that Harris will go to Foreign Affairs, and that would suit certain people around him. But the reality of it is, and it keeps him out of trouble, and it keeps him on the world stage, which is always a good thing for a leader.
And there's an EU presidency coming up that she could play out.
All that's good stuff. But the point about it is that I was surprised to hear that he was definitely interested in justice.
We need to take a break. We'll be back with lots more, particularly that Eoin Hayes story in the Social Democrats after this. Welcome back to Path to Power. So let's continue with our chat and gossip about government formation. But actually, let's talk about the Eoin Hayes story. I mean, that is utterly remarkable. Newly elected Social Democrats TD for Dublin Bay South, the 33-1 shot to become elected. Was very transfer friendly in the constituency. And in the end, as we noted on the podcast last week, I'm not sure whether it was the subscriber edition or the main edition, but took out Chris Andrews, the Sinn Féin TD who had been elected first in 2016, having previously served as a Fianna Fáil TD. So was it 2016 or 2020 he was elected? Either way, elected to and very, very prominent in relation to his support for the Palestinian people and Gaza, and very firm views, shall we say, in relation to Israel. And then Eoin Hayes, it turns out, is in his previous career worked for Palantir, which I've mentioned on this podcast before, Peter Thiel's very controversial company, which does data analysis and apparently is being used by the Israeli Defense Forces in relation to targeting Hamas and Hezbollah, but many civilians getting killed in the process of going after these people. So Eoin Hayes, it turns out, had not divested of share options in Palantir before he became actively involved in politics, as he said, but actually only completed the sale of his shares in July, a month after he joined Dublin City Council. That in itself was an issue, I think, Ivan, but the problem always is, it's always the cover-up, isn't it? And the problem that Eoin Hayes had is that he didn't give the correct information to the media or clearly to his own party colleagues, and he has completely undermined his credibility with them in relation to it. What do you think of it all?
Well, first of all, there's two elements to this. One is the kind of what I would call almost the virtue signalling aspect of it, which is since January, this firm, Palantir, is it?
Palantir, yeah.
Signed up a strategic partnership with the Israeli Defense Forces. So Eoin Hayes, having worked for Palantir from 2015 to 2017, had got this employee share option. And people say he should have divested them from the moment the Israeli war and that link up for the company was there. But much more serious for him is the fact that his so-called error on his declaration as a member of Dublin City Council, so he said he mistook the month of June and July. In terms of when he made the declaration, he said that he had disposed of the shares, which may be a criminal offence because it just wasn't true. And what compounded the matter then was, you would know better than me, there was a journalist in the Daily Mail who broke...
Craig Hughes of the Irish Daily Mail broke the story.
So he broke the story saying, well, actually, he didn't have the shares transferred when he declared that he had. And then Gary Gannon weighs in and says, well, you know, Craig Hughes is only looking for a job as a government advisor.
He didn't say Craig specifically. He said about certain journalists tracking down...
Well, it was a smear on Craig.
Yeah, and I mean, in fairness, Gary Gannon has phoned Craig Hughes and personally apologised to him. These were comments that Gary Gannon made on a podcast, and he went into sort of a good bit of detail suggesting that journalists such as Craig Hughes were following the story in the hope of landing jobs with government and the
Which
rest
was
of
a
it.
pretty effective smear if you think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'd call a proper smear.
In fairness to Gary, he has now apologised profusely for it and admitted he was wrong. But I suppose the problem for Gary Gannon and Social Democrats is they do look very silly, don't they, as well? I mean, they had taken, of all of the political parties, actually, they had taken one of the strongest positions in relation to what the government should be doing in opposition to Israel's actions in Gaza. And, you know, they're there with People Before Profit and the others, and Sinn Féin, in actually demanding government action. Now, whether Irish government action will make the blindest bit of difference to the way Israel behaves itself is a very moot point. But the point is that they wanted to make this gesture and signal, and then their own guy who got made 199,000 out of selling the shares. Although, do you know, if he'd held on to the shares, they'd be worth £500,000 now. So he took a big financial hit by selling when he did, even if he sold too late for political reasons.
So did he tell a lie is the first question on the form. Did he knowingly say that he'd divested the shares when he actually hadn't? And is it like his crowdfunding mistake where he has had to refund money because he took in excess of the limit? So I think that Sinn Féin are incensed about this. Now, they haven't led the charge about this, but they are waiting and waiting and waiting, because this will be an indelible stain on the Soc Dems virtue signalling. And most people feel when a journalist does virtue signalling, they say, well, actually, that's part of their job, and that's what they do, and that's their shtick, and that's actually the strictures against which their feet is held to the fire. But when the Soc Dems do virtue signalling and they have nosebleeds from altitude sickness, that is where this becomes nasty. And in the particular, you have a situation that Chris Andrews would have been elected, in my view.
Would he have been elected?
I think he would have.
Yeah, because
Hazel True was not a factor. He was the last seat for the last couple of counts was between Andrews and Hayes. And if this had got out, the whole Palantir story, and secondly, the misrepresentation of the dates, I have absolutely no doubt this under the radar candidate would have been above the radar and would have lost.
Okay, well then, in that case, should he resign his seat? Well, it is a legitimate question to ask whether he should resign his seat and cause a by-election to allow the people of Dublin Base South make a decision as to who they
Emma
want to
Blaine
represent.
would probably win that by-election, not Chris Andrews, if you actually think about it, because Sinn Féin were going for the last seat as opposed to the first seat. No, put it like this. I think much more relevant is not that question, because I think that he just won't resign.
He's decided to sit as an independent. Yeah. And I mean, does that mean he will stay as an independent?
That's my point.
Will the Soc Dems readmit him, or are they in a position where they just can't readmit him?
Sorry.
Or they'd want to readmit him?
That is the big question for the Soc Dems. Is he expelled? Or is he suspended? Now, my understanding is he's just suspended. So, is this just a temporary ruse to get over this? Or are they actually sincere about it, the Soc Dems? But I think this is another example that they really have a lot of inexperience when it comes to these issues. Your Catherine Murphys and Roisin Shortalls, who have been around the block, are no longer in the room. And actually, these newbies, the feeling is they haven't much clue.
How could they re-establish the relationship, do you think, with Eoin Hayes? Because they went out to bat for him, they stood on the plinth, and they defended him against, 23 times he was asked to explain the timing of the sale of his shares.
But my understanding is they took an instant decision to suspend him, and we're going to review in 3 weeks whether they're going to expel him or not. That's where I would be having my focus, of whether they expel him or not.
Okay. Right, what else do you know about what's going on?
Leo, let's talk about Leo for a second.
Leo, and going on about that various TDs don't understand percentages and sums.
Yeah, and that doctors and nurses are not being paid enough. So he did this big IMO memorial lecture, and I certainly think, as far as Harris and some of the FGers are concerned, they would rather he hadn't. And put it like,
wait till they see the book when he brings it up next year.
So the situation is, there's always this tricky relationship between former prime ministers and the next prime minister who's there or thereabouts, or party leader. And with Leo and Enda, that would have been a slight issue, and so on. So 2 bits of news. One is, it was considered decidedly unhelpful that a guy is so much in denial about the fact, 7 months ago you were Taoiseach of the country. You voluntarily walked off. If you were so concerned about the pay of nurses and doctors, why didn't you do something about it then? That's point one. Point two...
Which is a very valid point.
Absolutely. Point number 2, you are out of politics. You chose to get out of politics, and yet you're making statements as if you're still in politics. You are delusional in terms of your revised role. But the interesting thing I heard, Matt and him do have a plan, I'm
Matt
told.
Barrett.
Now, I haven't been speaking to Leo, so this is hearsay. And my hearsay is sometimes right and sometimes wrong. That he's actually...
Oh, God, yeah, right. Now I'm worried.
He's headed for the East Coast of America to have a new career, taking his political CV and their combined medical CV. And, you see Sir Nick Clegg now as Global Affairs Manager for Meta. That he's eyeing
East Coast or West Coast of America?
East Coast, I was told. East Coast.
What would he get in the East Coast?
I don't know.
Silicon Valley's
I
up
was
in the
just
West
told
Coast.
that there's a definite plan. The leave requirements, gardening leave requirements, will be fulfilled, and that he has a definite plan, and his future is in the US of A.
That doesn't surprise me.
Does it not?
No,
Well, I was just told it now.
actually,
I hadn't a clue. I didn't know whether he was going to Portugal or to Portumna. But the fact of the matter is that, you know...
I mean, they had moved a couple of years ago. I mean, and I'm saying this because it's not any secret. I mean, they moved out of his constituency and bought a house in Portobello in Dublin 8. That's well known. But I suppose a property like that would have a good rental value if they were to decide to move to the East Coast of America.
You that knows America, would his CV be in demand?
I suspect it would.
Yeah.
I suspect it.
Would it be as lecturing or would it be as a commercial advisory or what?
Might it not be as... Yeah, I would have thought he would look for a commercial consultancy that he would have... You know, don't forget he was Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment as well. Yeah. And, you know, remember he used to like going out and visiting Silicon Valley and talking to... Well, that's why I'm surprised you're saying the East Coast rather than the West Coast.
What I heard was that... Well, that would include Washington as well. As New York, but that the notion that he has no plan of what he's going to do just ain't quite true.
Can you imagine that he had no plan? I mean,
he says he has no plan. So I'm only taking it hearsay. I'm sufficiently naive to take.
Oh, you are. Yeah, you're very naive. That's always a word I would have associated with you, Ivan. Naive, absolutely.
So the other thing that caught my eye during the week, which I thought was a welcome development, was that there were two court cases. So we have often spoken about cyber bullies, what do you call them, keyboard warriors and so on. And I was very interested in two cases. One, and you'll be familiar with this, Peter Casey was a plaintiff in a case in Donegal.
That's right.
Where a Mr. McNamara was found that he got an award of damages of 140,000. This related to property in Buncrana, whereby actually Peter is accused of being anti-migrant, but he actually developed purpose-built properties for migrants to be recruited, to be homed in them, and so on, availing of state schemes and so on. And this person alleged that he was profiteering from the migration scheme and so on and so forth, and he refused to take anything down, and basically
he put it up on Facebook, wasn't it?
Yeah. And he sued him, and he got an award of that, and I would say considerable costs. The other case is that people in Kerry politics have spoken about this County Council and Dáil candidate from Knocknagoshel, Michelle Keane, who does a stream of videos with pretty abusive stuff against politicians. She didn't do that well, but she has been committed to prison this week for contempt of court in relation to a breach of a civil order, which a Garda sergeant in Listowel took against her. The point I'm making is conflating the two stories is it does seem that these keyboard warriors, these cyber bullies, are actually being brought to book. And I think it's an excellent thing because, you know, there was the issue of anonymity and there was the issue of, you know, would defamation apply? But now we see cases working through the court where people are forced to tell the truth, forced to retract and face fairly dire personal consequences if they don't behave themselves.
We need to take one more short break, before we come back with the last part of this edition of Path to Power. Welcome back to the final part of this edition of Path to Power, and I think you want to throw something at me, Ivan.
Well, no, I do. So far as that, we're now that the dust has settled, assessing what was the Fine Gael campaign like. Were they right to attack Fianna Fáil in the first 10 days? Did they manage the issues and the narrative well enough? But I want to put it to you. How did the media perform? Because stories happen all the time, viral stories. And so most people have it in their consciousness that the story of the campaign was the Charlotte incident, Charlotte Fallon, in Kanturk, and 3.4 million views. But I think for a lot of people, the fact that this was elevated to lead item on all mainstream media, 9 o'clock news and so on. And I would just pose the question, was that the most important issue in the election? Because my experience of fighting 8 general elections, there wouldn't be a day go by that someone who was against me, right, would either hurl abuse at me or would stage manage something. And in this day of camera phones, I'm just saying it's a very commonplace incident. And you know what? You might just tell whichever go to hell, you know what I mean, or something like that. And just, I'm not defending Harris for 1 second, but I'm just saying in the overall, the fact that the media made that the number one issue. And I'm not saying this for or against Fine Gael, and he's apologised for it, but I'm just saying, like, when I look at some of the things that were never discussed, planning reform and housing, how are you going to finance?
Who says they were never discussed?
They weren't. Sorry, no, but when people talk about what was the news coverage, very dull campaign, and the Can Turk was the only story, that is a lazy way. So what I'm actually accusing editors of the mainstream media of actually being suckered into a non-story and actually missing the major accountability stories of the election. Do you plead guilty or not guilty?
So what I love about this is when we prepare Pat to Power every week, I normally give you a list of topics and allow you an opportunity to read material and prepare what
which you have done for one of our specials.
yeah. And now you're just throwing this one at me out of nowhere, which I've had no opportunity to actually consider. But okay, let me try and think about this.
I'm thinking at the very highest levels of editorship, and you've been editor of a Sunday paper. In other words, what constitutes the biggest story of the campaign? And sorry, I'm not saying something that goes viral isn't a story, but I'm just wondering, are you really saying when we look at housing, when we look at mental health, when we look at infrastructure, when we look at so many other social problems, poverty, whatever, is Can Turk actually the most important issue?
Well, funny enough, I would say actually it didn't turn out to be the biggest story of the election campaign. Gerry Hutch was the biggest story of the election campaign. And I think certain elements of the media were wrong in the way that they highlighted him and turned him into a celebrity candidate. And, it was good for clicks and the rest of it and getting your sort of podcast numbers or whatever and stuff like that. But some of us took a decision that we weren't going to go looking for an interview with Gerry Hutch, that we weren't going to, as you use the phrase, platform him. And you could say that, every candidate is entitled to their say. But then, there were lots of independent candidates because you simply don't have time to interview every candidate or get everybody on. So why would you pick him, given that, because he's a career criminal and he has a nickname that's been given to him by sections of the media. So we put him on because that's sexy to do. I can understand exactly why there was the coverage that took place at the election count when he turned up, because he looked like in serious. So that was legitimate. And I think great credit to Paul Reynolds of RTE for the way that he actually went and put questions to him at the time. And I think you saw a lot of sort of an inarticulate response from Gerry Hutch, just shouting about what and changed.
And running away
And not knowing what he wanted. So in some respects, and this was that circus in relation to Gerry Hutch, maybe one of the things that's regarded as most memorable from the election campaign. But I'm saying that not to deflect away from the Simon Harris thing. And I suppose the key number, you've already mentioned it, is 3.4 million. How can you ignore something that is viewed 3.4 million times on social media? And what is interesting was that there's a whole range of things that are interesting, I think, in relation to this. I take your point that...
My point is the depth of like in the UK election, net zero 2050 was Starmer's thing, planning reform and building 1.5 million houses. There was substantive appraisal of that. Was there any substantive appraisal of this election by the media?
I I suppose there were certain things that we did try to highlight, but particularly maybe were the parties actually doing it. Sorry.
Even the promises, were they properly interrogated?
Well, I can only say that...
See, the media are good at giving it out, but they can't take it.
No, I'm trying to answer the question without you jumping in to try and answer it for me, okay? So just give me a second to try and answer this. There was extensive coverage across the newspapers and their websites. Nearly every policy document was analysed. There were TV and radio debates and everything. And I suppose a lot of this stuff went back before the sort of official start. We would have been hosting radio debates on housing and health and all the rest of it and stuff. But I take the point I want to get to, and I think you make an interesting point, is that this type of encounter with dissatisfied members of the public happens on a regular basis. But now, because of camera phones and because you can have certain things are edited and the rest of it, it's become a bigger issue. I suspect Fine Gael might have issues with... remember Simon Harris was walking down Capel Street and he was accosted by someone who it appeared was a member of the public, but it was actually Kieran Allen, who is the guru behind People Before Profit. Kieran Allen, who is a man who wants to destroy the capitalist system and the rest of it, former sociology lecturer in UCD. I think he's retired now. Maybe he's still a lecturer out there. And that was treated like a sort of a normal incident, but suddenly it gets broadcast all over. So what was interesting in relation to the Charlotte Fallon incident down in Kanturk was that it was filmed by RTE and that RTE actually did broadcast it, and it wasn't actually a random punter on the street who just happened to be there with their mobile phone. It was an RTE thing. And then when RTE realised it was going viral, they put it themselves on their 9 o'clock news, which I think they were quite entitled to do and the right thing to do, and everyone else did follow. And I suppose for me, I remember when I saw it first on a Friday night at around 11:30, sort of just my last death scroll through social media before going to bed. When I saw it, I immediately went, oh, right. That's.
But he didn't use bad language. He just walked away from it.
It wasn't nothing to do with bad language. It was the demeanour, and it was the sort of almost the preemptory.
No, in no way am I defending Harris, but I'm just saying that type of incident will have happened to every party leader in every single campaign, and be because you meet people all the time, because you're actually dealing with people randomly, as opposed to even at doorsteps. You will get abuse. You will get abuse of people that don't agree. And my point is this. If the campaign is going to be remembered for Kanturk, in my opinion, that's fine. Let that be so. But the reality is that's the media not doing their job.
But hold on, is it remembered for that? I mean, surely people... the one thing that was clear was that, the TV debates got big numbers, right? I don't know what numbers the Virgin Media interviews got, but Colette Fitzpatrick did very good interviews with the three main party leaders. And I don't know... I know that certainly that we would have numbers from the radio. You know from your own time of radio, there's a thing called the JNLR results, which are done by survey, and every 3 months you get your figures and the rest of it. But it is possible now to track things like digital listening to the quarter hour.
Okay.
And you get the figures the following day. And you can also get your podcast numbers very quickly. And certainly we would know that for ourselves, our numbers for the election campaign were very strong, that there was a big interest in listening to political interviews and whatever. So
my point is this, that the mainstream media's shorthand for election GE 2024 was dull campaign. Kanturk was the only flashpoint or turning point. And that is the shorthand of it. And I'm kind of saying, well, did you do your job? Because there was a lot of issues for the next 5 years in this country with some of the challenges that lie ahead in terms of maintaining our tax base, in terms of 1 million growth in population, and all the creaking pressure points, be it on the health service and new hospitals, be it in relation to education and third level or whatever it is, the fact, or training or apprenticeships and so on. To say that was the only show in town, to me, means someone wasn't doing their job and had lazy shorthand.
See, was it the only show in town? Maybe it was the only sort of spark, but also ask yourself, where were Fine Gael in the opinion polls when that happened, and did the eventual election outcome, was the fall in the percentage share of the Fine Gael vote attributable to the public's reaction to what happened with Harris there?
No, Fine Gael were on the slide, and Harris was under pressure, which is fine. I've no problem with that. I actually thought that would be actually sharper than it was at the end of the day.
But hold on. Didn't the parties that won, essentially, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, did they not actually spend their time in the last week, which was dutifully reported, shall we say, by the media, on looking at, well, what's going to happen because of the Trump administration, what's going to happen with the tax revenues that we have coming in? I would have thought all those things were. And I suppose then, is it the media's job to decide for its audience as to what you should be interested in, or is it reflecting what the actual interests are? So, for example, climate change didn't feature particularly highly in very many of the discussions. Instead, it became a question of, is it the public wants to get the Greens out, as they actually did, rather than actually discussing, well, can we get real here as to what requirements are in climate change? We tried in relation to housing, I certainly know, is to say that, for all of your promises, actually, you can't actually build the numbers. You're not building them now that you say you're building. Will you be able to build? Will you be able to get the workers? Will you be able, you and I brought it up on this podcast a number of occasions. I brought it up in a number of interviews on the radio. Where's the money going to come from? What is the role of foreign private capital in building the houses and apartments? So, these questions did come up.
Well, put it like this. I don't think the campaign will be remembered for that. But even taking the issue of the net zero and decarbonisation, there was no real interrogation of, okay, we've all these targets for 2030. That didn't really exist. Only the aspirational side of it existed for this government. But for the next government, the level of fines will be... So what are the fines? Are they going to be 8 billion? Will they go into
20 billion?
Or will they go into the ether? Was that discussed? There was no proper interrogation of that. And what I'm saying is that the media, by and large, is lazy and is just following social media. We've discussed that issue.
We discussed it, now, and a number of people have said it to me since they're laughing. I mean, you spent years presenting on News Talk. You still go back in as occasional contributor in News Talk. You're a talking head on RT programmes. I know you'll be on Katie Hannon next Monday night. I know it's partly because you're a former government minister, but you know what? I mean, you were as far back a government minister as I am a newspaper editor. It's over 20 years ago. You are part of the media elite, Ivan.
Right.
The mainstream media elite.
The other thing I want to talk about so we have an interesting question about playing ministerial roulette.
That's for the subscriber.
So I have lots of gossip about who might get which job. But I just want to make one other substantive point. I don't know if you remember a guy called Eddie Malloy.
I do. I know Eddie.
So Eddie has been one of the premier management consultants, organisational strategy and so on, and has been used by large private sector organisations and the state. And so I thought poor Eddie had died because I texted him a couple of times and he never replied to my text. So next thing, last Tuesday, I got a best wishes to you and your family for Christmas from Eddie. Immediately I rang him and I spent an hour on the phone to him. And he always comes out with wisdom. And he said, there is a real problem in this country. And that is the accountability of the permanent government, the accountability of Secretary Generals, and what is going to be done about that. And I'd like to talk about in the subscription edition how that might be included in the programme of government, of which Bikegate is just the tip of the iceberg. That who was brought before any committee to say, I signed off on this OPW adventure. And the fact of the matter is that unless we have some serious discussion about the lack of horizontal organisation within government, about the need to actually change the permanent government, this notion that a report is a result. I give you the example of the Housing Commission report. It was a big item in the last programme for government. We're going to have this super-duper Housing Commission. It was full of very illustrious people, public sector, private sector, and you know what? It was thrown in the bin.
I'm going to steal that line from you for stuff that I write in the future. A report is not a result. I like that.
Okay.
I also like the fact that you're selling the subscription edition now. You're getting there. You're starting to realise that
there's only so much I can say in 50 minutes.
Okay. By the way, if you do want to hear the subscription edition, it comes out every Monday. It's ad-free. And how you get it is you go to pathtopowerpodcast.com, and for the small sum of €6 a month, then you get an extra weekly helping. And in the subscription edition, which will be available this Monday, we are going to be doing, on the basis of a very good question coming in from one of you, we're going to be doing fantasy cabinet as to who should get the various positions, and Ivan will give you his gossip in more detail as to who might be going where. And we have lots of other questions that have come in that we're going to be addressing in the subscription edition of Path to Power. But for this, the one that you can get freely access across various channels, from me, Matt Cooper.
And from me, Ivan Yates.
Thank you very much for joining us.